doctors and other professionals and other professionals. So the big social event, this went on for 10 days, but there was one major social event at the Metropolitan Museum where everybody was invited to a fancy reception. So everyone looked forward to that. So in March of 2020, Gilson and I set off to New York. We went first to Washington, D.C., and left by train, arriving in New York on March 11. The festivities had just started, but the next day, on March 12th, the Metropolitan Museum of Art announced in the afternoon that it was closing. Closing. The reason was that 3 or 4 employees whose work was spread throughout the museum had turned up positive for COVID, and everybody thought that this closure was temporary as the museum underwent a big cleaning. But in just a day or two, New York hospitals started filling up, and just 3 days later, on March 15th, the Met announced that the big reception was canceled. The closure would last indefinitely.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't quite ready.
Oh.
Oh, yes, I was, I guess.
Yeah. There you go. You got
No,
it.
that,
Here's some water. Excuse me.
oh, thank you.
Let's get back to, there you go.
Yes, I wanted to go here. How do I move this?
With the cursor, just with that.
It was just, okay.
once.
So the Met closed indefinitely on March 15th, and the big reception was canceled. So all of a sudden, all the small galleries in town followed suit, and they closed, and the auction houses continued their sales, but they all went online. So Gilson and I made reservations to leave town because everything was closed. And this was the scene on March 16th at Newark Airport. It was so eerie. There was nobody there. Nobody. And there were huge empty spaces, but the planes did fly, and we did get home to San Antonio. Now at the museum, there was havoc, absolute havoc all over the country for everybody. Like many museums, the staffs, the museums closed and staffs were sent home. Suddenly, task forces had to be organized to plan what you do with a museum that's closed. With staff sent home, how could the museum continue its operations and earn revenue? Clearly, the revenue loss was going to be huge. So many museums started by reducing their staffs. So there were layoffs and furloughs, and a really difficult time for everyone. But with these closures then, museums also felt obligated to maintain their missions. And you can see here with this slide how we had started in March, gotten through halfway through March, attendance stopped, and then for the month of April, there's 0 because no one's there. So how are we going to fulfill our missions, and what was our board going to do? Well, I'm very proud to say that in San Antonio, the Board of Trustees decided they would not have anyone leave their jobs. They wanted everyone to stay on their jobs. Instructions were given to comb the endowment and find monies that could be used. And then the big solution, of course, for the museums was the PPP loan. the PPP, which was a small business administration loan, the payroll paycheck program, which allowed museums to take out loans to support their salaries of their staffs. The San Antonio Museum applied in April of 2020, immediately after the shutdown, and we got $900,000, which was enough to carry the staff through the rest of the fiscal year. Then then what to do? So all over the country, museum staffs had to pivot immediately online for programming. So, and if you were an internet consumer during the pandemic, you probably have seen many of these. Here at the San Antonio Museum that you see on this slide, there were suddenly virtual tours, and the virtual tours looked at the collection, and we did them with lunchtime tours, happy hour tours, even talks with specialists over dinner that was delivered to homes that signed up for the dinner along with a bottle of wine. So all kinds of efforts were made. The art newspaper here recorded that the Metropolitan Museum beefed up its social media efforts, and things on Instagram and Facebook went out. And then one of the most clever things was this invitation to people to recreate works of art at home using whatever they had. So there were, great nudes lying on beds with red drapery. And this one was one of the funniest. It is, of course, a corgi with a hat and a blue shirt, which reminded somebody of Van Gogh. So a great deal of fun was had with those. Now, it was important for the San Antonio Museum and many others just to continue as much as they could with ordinary work. And one of the efforts that had been made at San Antonio was to do a land remembrance. I was surprised one morning to open the New York Times and find this picture. This is the front entrance of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This plaque here describes the museum's thanks to the people of New York for their support of the museum. But this is new. This went up in the spring in the fall of 2020. And this is the plaque that reads that the Metropolitan Museum of Art, situated in Lenape, and homeland of the Lenape tribe. I can't read it there, sorry. At any rate, they respectfully acknowledge and honor all indigenous communities, past, present, and future, for their ongoing and fundamental relations to the region. Have many of you been associated with organizations that have done this? A lot of them have, and they're organizations of all types. They can be associations, academic associations, schools, and businesses even were doing these wonderful remembrances. Well, in San Antonio as well, an effort was being made, particularly at the San Antonio Museum of Art. Now let me go back to this. In 2018 in San Antonio, there was a tricentennial celebration, 300 years of the history of the city. And it was very colorful, and it included some Indian tribes who did dance performances. However, the native tribes in San Antonio who are not federally recognized don't get a lot of attention. And they complained about this, that their role was diminished in contrast to the Spanish, whose Catholic priests came to convert the Indians in the area to Catholicism. So the museum picked up on this and sent staff to work with communities of Native Americans and to write a land remembrance. So what they came up with was this as the San Antonio Museum of Art's Remembrance, which recognizes the first people of the area, the Estocquina Carrizo Connecturo tribe of Texas, the Twejan Band of Mission Indians, and so forth. Their names and contributions have been erased over time, including migratory peoples of the Chaman-Hakuk and those of indigenous descent who continue to migrate as an ancestral right that predates imposed borders. So the museum then commits to continued dialogue and thoughtful presentation of the cultural resources of autochthonous, native, and indigenous people from all over the world. And this, for the museum, includes areas such as, or collections such as the Oceanic collection the museum has, the African collections the museum has, and of course the Asian. So it is very, or attempts to be very expansive. Now, in addition to that, there was a lot of emphasis during the COVID year on DEAI, the diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion movement that, is part, that grew up with other social movements such as Black Lives Matter, and is being introduced as a practice by all sorts of organizations and people in San Antonio. The board members of the San Antonio Museum of Art had to do training that was introduced by the city and county to train people in DEAI principles. And then the museum engaged in various public programs also to foster these ideas. Of course, hopefully it would lead to greater diversity of staff and much more diversity in recognizing the communities in the city and other movements. This is, in particular, I wanted to point out by Pernille Joseph, this book on the shield and the sword is a biography of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X that he wrote. He lives in Austin, Texas, and is a wonderful writer and thinker about equity and social justice. So, with March then of 2021, definitely museums were gradually reopening. Visitors had galleries entirely to themselves. It was a rather solitary kind of exercise, but for some people very peaceful. And here, this is not moving. Could you come and help me? Oh, there, I got it. This is a view of the Grand Hall at the Met, and you see people coming in, socially distanced, and we're all wearing masks. So that was pretty much the scene, and it was very good. Okay, so we have told you, then I've shown you this before, this attendance map, and in March, it was low in April. There was nobody, and then gradually, the visitors started coming back. But still much smaller numbers than previously, and they were probably 25 to 30% of normal during the first months of 2021. However, let me show you what happened next. There, you see this amazing spike here in March of 2021. What happened was a pop-up installation. The museum in the previous year had engaged the help of a PR firm, a local PR firm, because we were facing in 2021 the 40th anniversary of the museum, and we wanted to get the word out about the museum and the anniversary and so forth. So we had engaged this PR firm, and the owner of that company, being a very inventive man, said, you know, you need to bring in more audience, and you've got this opportunity in March, which is spring break. So all the kids are not in school or are not at home on their Zoom. Let's do a pop-up installation, and I'll lend you all this material from adventure movies and things like The Avenger and Back to the Future and Batman and, you know, Tony Stark and the Iron Man. Well, this was brought to the staff, and they hated it. Oh my God, they absolutely despised the idea. They said things like, "Oh no, this is so tacky. It's so commercial. This is not fine art. How could we possibly do this? I mean, we would ruin our reputations." That was definitely a risk. I admit I'd never mounted anything like this before. The curatorial staff absolutely refused to participate, and everyone was negative. But my co-interim director, who was the chief financial officer, and I decided that, and the key was that this firm was going to supply us with a media buy of $275,000 just for this show. Now, this was the middle of February. We had to get it up by the middle of March. We had only 30 days to do it, but he had everything. And it was all in a warehouse outside of town, and all he had to do was drive it in. So we decided to do it. The staff, as I said, were very unhappy, and particularly about the fact that they thought we were going to just throw up these items and have people come and look at them. There was no narrative, there was no information. And I thought they were right. But what was I going to do since everyone was so negative? And my solution, this is Iron Man and Tony Stark, his car, my solution was to invite the protective services staff of the museum, the security guards, to write the labels and prepare other information, accompanying information. Now, I don't know if you know, but security staffs at museums are largely composed of artists. And I managed to put together a group of 16 who were so excited to participate in this. They are artists with art school degrees, portfolios, and of course, working as a security guard, a rather low-level position in a museum, was their day job to support their habits and profession. So I am so proud of them. They wrote these didactics, both labels for each of the cars, describing the history of their manufacture, the designers who designed them, how long it took, any special problems, and they even did drawings to point out the features of the automobiles. This one is the Back to the Future, the first DeLorean, actually, the real DeLorean that was used in the movies. So this was really thrilling, and it really did bring in a horde of people during March and spring break. The day we opened, all of that advertising, remind you, the day we opened, there were lines at the door waiting to get in. So the gamble paid off, and it brought to us enough revenue that we were assured that we could manage our budget for the rest of the fiscal year. That's bringing up to the end of September of this year. So that was a major excitement in the exhibition field. The other activity was a little tense. We, in the fall of 2020, I was startled to receive one day an email from the office of Cyrus Vance, the Attorney General of the state of the Eastern District of New York. Cyrus Vance, if you didn't know it, is hot after looted art. His office is making a very big push to find and prosecute art thieves who have brought stolen art to the United States, most of which is a good bit of which is in public museums. So we received this subpoena to return these 4 Greek vessels from the collection. Now, the classical collection at the San Antonio Museum is a very handsome one. It includes Greek and Roman sculpture as well as examples of Greek pottery. These 4 were always beloved by the community who did not have any other examples to study of Greek art, and even included a large group of fragments that scholars like because they use the fragments in order to study the brushstrokes and identifying characteristics of individual painters of Greek pots. Now, the Cyrus Vance's office wished to gather up as much as they could in order to restitute it back to Italy. Now, the reason for this is they had arrested a few years ago a man named Mr. Amenjad, who was a Syrian, I think, but became part of a small network of looters in Italy, and he brought looted pieces to the United States and sold them across the country. And he sold several to Mr. Denman, our collector in San Antonio. You may wonder why they were going back to Italy and not Greece, but the interesting fact is that these pieces were stolen from former Etruscan tombs that were found in Italy, particularly the region of Tuscany, northern Italy, Tuscany and Umbria. And the Etruscans at their time, they were an Iron Age people, so it was 750 to 500 BCE was the period that they lived. They became quite wealthy and quite sophisticated in their tastes and loved to buy Greek ceramics and sculptures from the Greeks themselves and bring them back to their homeland, which happens now to be in Italy. So those were the tombs being looted, and pieces sent not only to the United States, but probably all over the world. So those, the Greek pieces were packed up. The museum was happy to comply with this. No museum wants to have on view stolen art. It's just ethically incorrect. So we were happy to cooperate. Homeland Security came and picked them up and sent them all back to New York, and the pieces are supposed to be sent back to Italy at the end of this summer, in a few days, actually, in August. But the tale of stolen art was all encompassing last year. It was constant. These two pieces I'm showing you are carved lintels from temples in northern Thailand. And they were at, believe it or not, the Asian Art Museum, where I was director for 15 years. They had been purchased in the 1960s by the original donor to the Asian Art Museum, Mr. Avery Brundage, who was a Chicago businessman and a former president of the International Olympic Committee. He was an avid collector of Asian art. He bought these in the 60s during the Vietnam War. But they were recognized by somebody, and the museum was approached a few years ago, actually, by Homeland Security, which was also investigating stolen art. So Homeland Security came and they negotiated the return, and the return was a very happy moment for the people in Thailand. This is one of the reliefs, and you can see it there. This is Gilson's fancy manipulation of images on Zoom. And here at this ceremony in Thailand, they were so happy to have them back that they held a ceremony with prayers, chants, and dancing to welcome these pieces home. Now, the most interesting phenomenon also in stolen art was the constant revealing of the activities of this man named Subhash Kapoor. He, as you can see from my notes there, he looted works from Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Cambodia, Thailand, Nepal, Indonesia, and Myanmar. He was found to have smuggled 2,500 artifacts and in excess of $143 million. And so many of these have been returned, and they did come from lots of distinguished institutions, including Toledo, Peabody, Essex, and Honolulu. So his gallery, where he had a gallery in New York City on Madison Avenue for a good 30 years, I think. And he sold an awful lot of material in that time. Well, the tale about him, although he himself was arrested in 2011 and is in jail in India, the tale about him continues because the officials are digging up more and more information. This was a headline in my art newspaper just a few days ago, July 21st, 2021, and it's about the restorer in London whom he used to take the stolen objects, clean them up, repair them a bit, and so they never look like they had been in either underground or ripped from their environments. And this one was really astonishing to see. And then just this morning, this appeared in my inbox. And this is a story about 13 pieces that are returning to India from the National Museum of Australia in Canberra. And all of these 13 pieces were purchased from Art of the Past, from Mr. Kapoor's gallery. So, it's a very big story, and you might wonder, well, what has this got to do with you? Well, what it is this. These two pieces are ceramic jars that were purchased by a couple in New York from Mr. Kapoor's gallery, Art of the Past. In 2020, no, actually before that, before the pandemic, the fall of 2020, or 19, we went to, my associate and I went to New York and visited the collectors who had these. They happened to have the enviable position of running an endowment whose proceeds were to go exclusively to buying art to give to museums. That was the entire practice. These two pieces that they offered us that day are so magnificent. This jar is from the Indus Valley. And the Indus Valley in India, you know, in northern India, runs up through Pakistan. It was one of the earliest urban environments, civilizations in the world, of course. And it was the mature part of the Indus Valley civilization was from, I think, 1900 to 1300 BCE, before the Christian era. And the area from which vessels like this came were from Harappa, the city of Harappa, in a site called Cemetery H. So then the piece on this side is from Central Asia. It's quite different, and it's much later. This dates by TL testing. We know that this dates from the year 600 to the year 1000, and probably found in Uzbekistan. So we're not quite sure. This motif is one that comes from Chinese pottery, this checkerboard motif. Well, these are glorious, and we salivated over them. But the problem is they bought them from Mr. Kapoor. And so we went back to the museum and debated with the rest of the staff about whether or not we could take them. In the end, we said no. And now, after having seen all of the activity of repatriating Mr. Kapoor's art, I have to be glad we did. But it is a shame that, you know, they can't be held. All right, then I have one last item to show you. Artworks lost in war. Look at this. Isn't this wonderful? This is a marble head, a little damage on the nose. This is another grand picture of that head. But do you see this? Can you read it? 080969. I guess it's August 9th, 1969. Goodwill with the price tag, and it's $34.99. That's the price. A woman in Austin, Texas, walked into the Goodwill store there and found this piece. She bought it for $35. She was a small dealer, so she recognized the fact that it had quality, and she simply wanted to sell it for good money. So she contacted two auction houses, Sotheby's and Christie's, and asked if they would take on the piece. Well, the auction houses did research, and a specialist at Sotheby's in London recognized that the piece was a missing piece from a German museum. Believe it or not. They called, this is it. We were able to find photographs, and this is, as you can see here, the Pompajanum in Auschwitz. In Germany, yes. Well, the town is important. Schlossfenberg in Germany, and this town is just outside of Frankfurt. There is a this museum It is a replica of a Roman villa that was built in the 1840s by King Ludwig of Bavaria. It was a idealized building that had decorations and mosaic floors that were copied absolutely after originals, authentic originals. In this photograph, this old photograph, you can see the head there. This is two photographs, and here you can see the piece a little closer up. So you can see that it's the same one. But this is what happened. This town, Aschaffenburg, Germany, was the last town to see urban battle during the late part of the World War II. This took place in the Allies came and, of course, bombed the town. The battle went on for about a week before the Germans retreated, and this Roman villa was completely destroyed. This is the site where the pedestal was standing before. And I imagine that what happened was that a GI surveying this area found the head, picked it up, and brought it home to the United States. So the piece, when the piece was identified as having been in this German institution, the woman consulted our curator at the San Antonio Museum, who is a specialist in Greek and in Roman art, and she contacted the museum and began the negotiations for the piece to be returned to Germany. And they have decided to do that. I believe the woman who found it wished to have some sort of finder's fee, and I don't know what happened, but I presume that the museum did pay her something. But the piece is still in Texas. It is going on loan to the San Antonio Museum of Art, where it will be on view for about 2 years and before it is finally returned back to Germany. So that is my talk. I am done. Thank you. All right.
If you would stop the screen share there,
Mm-hmm.
and we can turn it to gallery view, then we can actually see the audience.
Okay, how do I do that, Gilson?
Would you like me to do that? That's what Gilson did before. Oh, there we go. Okay. Stop the share. And then we can go to gallery view, and now you can see all the people who are willing to be seen.
All right, thank you.
So, anyone who has a question, are there questions in the chat? Or?
Yes, all right, we'll start with the audience here. Margaret?
I don't know what word to use to describe the film stuff, the what?
The virtual tour?
No, the back car.
Oh, movie medal.
Oh, movie medal, yes.
The movie what?
The movie medal was the title of the show, yes.
It seems to me that there's a real tension going on right now in museums and other high cultural institutions between moving metal and the staff that doesn't want to have anything to do with it. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little more.
Well, yes, okay, I'll try to repeat the question. Margaret made note of the fact that there seems to be these days in institutions of high art tension between the staff and projects, not just the staff, but people and projects that are pop art or popular arts, like movie metal, like the show that we put up. as a pop-up installation. And yes, and certainly it's true. It's just that, you know, most museums do consist of works of art where people do study a long time in order to get jobs there. The curatorial staffs have master's degrees and Ph.D s, and they're highly trained and sophisticated in certain areas of art history. But and other staff too are accustomed to feeling that their institutions are high-class institutions. So to have things on view that you think are more appropriate to perhaps a shopping mall, you know, somewhere, a place with pinball machines and so forth, is rather disgusting. And so I think that's the tension. However, you know, it is a problem because high art is going to miss a great part of the community who never get introduced really to museums and the riches of collections that are there and the lessons, the objects of the past and the lessons of cultures that have gone before us. So it's really snobbish to say that we don't want these people who have these other interests to come in. We need to make efforts. I think it's all part of DEAI in a way. You've got to make efforts to diversify your audiences and make efforts to bring them in. So to an extent, you've got to show them what they know and like. The audience for Moving Metal, interestingly enough, was not just children, although there was certainly a lot of children there, but the real fans are people in their late 30s and 40s who grew up with this kind of action movie and pop art. So they're the ones who are most familiar with it and love it. And that's what we found. So we were really happy to get people in the museum who had never been there before. A number of them took memberships. And so, you know, hopefully they'll come back. And not all of them, but some of them went from that popular show to the other galleries. And so found out we had Egyptian mummies and goodness, and, you know, wonderful folk arts from Mexico and pre-Columbian material and all sorts of great things. Okay, there was, yes.
I have a question about your museum in San Antonio.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about the Asian collection. And my major question is, did you purchase anything there for that collection?
Oh, great. Thank you. The question was about the Asian collection at the San Antonio Museum of Art, what it consists of, and have I purchased anything? And the answer is yes. Okay, the museum, interestingly enough, has a very strong Asian collection, and is certainly something that I did not know about, even though I had lived in Texas before, in Fort Worth and Dallas. The Asian collection is broad. It covers parts of India, Nepal, Southeast Asia, Korea, Japan, and a huge collection of Chinese material, principally ceramics, but ceramics that start in the centuries BCE and go all the way to the 20th century, including magnificent things of examples of Tang Dynasty three-color ware in goblins and guardians and horses and camels, and also the exquisite blue and white wares of the Yuan Dynasty, the 14th century, when Chinese blue and white porcelain became quite famous. We have pieces that actually date to the 14th century, 3 of them, as a matter of fact. So it's really a superb collection. And then of the things that I've been able to buy, I am very supportive of my associate there, the associate curator Sean, who is Chinese, and he bought this year a group of 4 items, 2 of which are from the Liao dynasty in northern China, which was contemporary with Sung, so it's sort of 11th, 12th century. But it was a kingdom of nomads who learned Chinese and learned Chinese customs, and they had grand tombs that have been excavated recently and producing really wonderful items. We bought a gold crown that had belonged to a woman, and a gold plaque with a crouching lion on it, and other decorative items like a jade belt, for example. In Japanese art, I've been able to buy paintings. The collection there is weak in paintings, so I need a lot of paintings. The best story is that I got a phone call from a small dealer in Austin, Texas, who sent me pictures of a pair of scrolls that he owned, and they were really stunning. So I went there to look at them, and it was so amazing because this pair of scrolls copied a pair of very famous Buddhist scrolls that are in Tokyo right now at a temple. I had seen those originals that are in Tokyo before. I knew the subject matter, so I was stunned first by that. But the most incredible thing was that these scrolls on silk were not painted. They were yuzen dyed. And the yuzen dyeing technique is a textile technique of using a resist to block out areas and dye areas individually using this resist. So this entire pair of this Buddhist scene of monks grooming themselves, bathing, clipping off their fingernails, getting shaved, it's hilarious, were done in this yuzen dyed technique. It's absolutely unique. I've sent pictures to the Tokyo National Museum to find out about them. They could not tell me much because apparently there's nothing like this pair anywhere that anyone has seen. But they found the name of the maker, and I can date them to about 1870. So that has been thrilling. But yet, no, I'm in search of Japanese paintings and ceramics. We're getting those as well. All right, anything else? Yes, sir.
Do you have a team that investigates fakes that could possibly come in?
Oh, do we have a team that investigates fakes that possibly come in? No, we don't have a team, but the museum the museum curators, when they recommend things, have to be very careful. So we do research on pieces before they come in, before we accept them, before we buy them or receive them as gifts. We do research on them to make sure that they are authentic. But it's sometimes hard to tell. Yep, sometimes. Okay.
There's a question on the chat as well.
A question on the chat, all right. Okay. How did how did the curatorial staff react to your idea of asking the security guards to do the captions? Thank you, Moira. They hated it. Oh, they were so annoyed. I mean, I think fundamentally they wanted, I think they secretly hoped that the whole enterprise would fail, but they were stunned. No one ever said anything more to me about it, but they did tell me that if we ever get this kind of idea again, it has to be the museum staff, the preparators, and the curatorial staff who do it. So I had to promise that, twist my arm, yes, I'll let you get involved. Yes?
I was glad to hear that by having that metal museum piece that you brought in to bring people back to your museum, that it opened the door to maybe a lot of people, as you say, that went to other parts of your museum and found out how wonderful it was. But I was curious as to how large those Cambodian scrolls were, because when you showed the dancers and the festival that they were having, they looked very large.
Yes, the question was about the people who came to the movie metal, but then went to other areas of the museum and discovered the collections, but also the pieces that were in San Francisco. Those stone lintels look quite large, and they are large. They were, each one is about the length of this screen and about this tall. So they're very heavy. They were, pieces of the construction of temples made of stone.
It's been something to get them moved from Cambodia
Oh, yeah.
to here, whoever did,
Yes, yes. It was a lot of work, indeed. But when there's money involved, I think you can do a lot of things. Yes, Joe.
I'm fascinated by the fact that you had people visiting the museum throughout the pandemic period.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if you had also done things online like other museums, or if you were in fact a physical museum for physical visitors only during the pandemic.
Oh, no, we started like everyone else online, and we did all these programs online. And although we did open, the visitorship was a trickle, smaller than we expected or hoped. And so it was essential to keep the programming online. So everything was online. Much of the staff worked from home. I mean, with the pandemic, if you had everybody back on staff, the cleaning protocols were so demanding that you needed to triple your custodial staff. And we couldn't do that. So if we had people just stay at home and work from home, which you can do over Zoom, then it was preferable. So all meetings were held on Zoom. During the pandemic, I was on Zoom, 3 and 4 and 5 times a day with various meetings. But the programming went on, so the education programs were online and had their audiences. The book club, the various exhibition lectures, and everything was online. The board meetings were online. So they just gathered to have their meetings online as well. So everybody was doing that. Yes.
Do you have statistics on how many people visited you online or attended programs?
Ah, that's a good question. You know what we have bought recently is a new software called Lights, and that software enables us to use the data that we have collected and drill down and get that kind of numbers. And so I don't think that anyone has done any digging for that, but I think we can get it because of the counts of people who attended online for programs is always there. So it's a matter of somehow digging it out of the data that you collect, Yes, Joe.
Do you have plans for your next retirement?
Lovell. My next retirement's in Lovell.
Bravo. Well, thank you very, very
Okay.
much. This has been a terrific talk. And we are very grateful, and I want to say that this talk has really fulfilled a great deal of our desire this summer to have talks on things that we don't know about and that we hadn't suspected we had people among us who could tell us about. And that's just lovely. We have another talk coming up next week by Peter Ellison, who is talking about an evolutionary perspective on COVID-19, talking about the disease itself as an aspect of evolution in virology, and I presume in human history as well, but I can't guess because, of course, we don't know yet. So come back next Thursday, August 5th, either online or in the community room for Peter Ellison talking about the evolutionary perspective on COVID-19. And Emily, thank you again.
Thank you.
This was a delight.